The modern world loves one myth more than almost any other, that if you become good enough, smart enough, skilled enough, the room will eventually recognize you, that competence naturally rises, that the most capable person becomes the most respected person. But if you have spent any serious time in offices, friend groups, creative industries, politics, academia, or even families, you already know something uncomfortable. This is often false. The person who does the best work is not always the person with the most influence. The person with the clearest judgment is not always the one people follow. The person carrying the team is often outranked, overlooked, or quietly used by someone less capable but more legible in the status game. So the real question is not whether competence matters. It does. The real question is why competence alone so often fails to produce status. And once you understand that, a second question appears. If skill is not enough, then what actually converts ability into influence? This is what most people never learn. Not because the answer is hidden, but because it is psychologically inconvenient. We want to believe the social world is rational. We want to believe that merit announces itself. We want to believe that good work speaks for itself. Usually, it does not. Work does not speak. People speak for it. Perception frames it, timing amplifies it, status protects it, and social proof decides whether others even notice it. In this essay, we are going to break down why competence often loses to perception, why some highly capable people remain socially weak, and how status is actually built through visibility, framing, emotional control, and strategic self-presentation. Not to turn you into a manipulator, but to make sure your value is not invisible in a world that rewards more than value alone. The first thing to understand is that competence and status are not the same currency. They overlap, but they are not identical. Competence is about actual ability. Can you solve the problem? Can you produce results? Can you think clearly under pressure? Can you create value that is real? Status is different. Status is a social judgment. It is the collective perception of how much weight your presence carries, how seriously people take your words, how much room your behavior is allowed to occupy, how much resistance your opinions meet, how much attention follows you before you have proven anything in that specific moment. This is why a highly competent person can remain low status, while a moderately competent person can command the room. One has substance, the other has social translation, and in group settings, translation often matters almost as much as substance. This distinction sounds cynical at first, but it is simply realistic. Human beings do not relate to reality directly, they relate to signals. They infer value from cues. They read confidence, reputation, timing, association, calmness, and the reactions of others. Then they use those signals to decide who matters. Behavioral science has repeated this lesson for decades in different forms. People use heuristics. They make rapid judgments from incomplete information. They outsource evaluation to social proof. They confuse fluency with intelligence, competence with competence, familiarity with trustworthiness, visibility with importance. None of this means competence is useless. It means competence alone is often too silent. A person can be brilliant and still unreadable, capable and still socially clumsy, essential and still taken for granted. Many ambitious people learn this too late. They spend years sharpening their craft while neglecting the social architecture around their craft. Then they feel betrayed when someone less talented gets promoted, gets heard, gets chosen, gets trusted, or gets followed. They call it unfair. Sometimes it is. But fairness is not the central operating principle of status systems. Perception is. That is the first point. Competence creates potential. Status determines whether that potential gets recognized, rewarded, and defended in public life. And once you understand that, a lot of social confusion starts to clear. Think about the person at work who always fixes problems but rarely gets credit. They are the one everyone goes to when something breaks. They know the systems, they rescue deadlines, they catch the mistakes others miss. But in meetings, they speak cautiously, they explain too much. They do not frame their contributions with authority. They often arrive after the narrative has already been set by louder or more politically skilled people. What happens? Their labor becomes infrastructure, useful but not prestigious, necessary but not admired. They become the person the machine depends on, not the person the group imagines leading it. That distinction matters. Groups do not grant status only for usefulness. They grant status for visible usefulness, interpreted usefulness, and strategically narrated usefulness. This is why two people can contribute very different levels of value and still receive the opposite amount of recognition. One person solves, the other person is seen solving. One person does the work, the other person shapes the story of the work. One person is technically indispensable, the other becomes psychologically central. And in the social world, psychological centrality often wins. This brings us to the second point. Status is not just earned by results. It is built through legibility. Legibility means people can quickly understand what you are, what you contribute, and why they should orient around you. If your value is complex, quiet, delayed, or difficult to explain, you are at a disadvantage compared to someone whose value is easier to perceive. This happens everywhere. The engineer who quietly prevents catastrophic mistakes may be less admired than the charismatic presenter who explains the final product. The analyst who catches risks early may be less respected than the executive who announces the decision confidently. The emotionally disciplined person in a social group may be less influential than the person with a stronger persona and clearer social narrative. People respond to what they can read, not only to what is true. This is one reason competence alone often fails. Competence is frequently backstage. Status is front stage. Sociologist Erving Goffman built much of his work on this basic reality. Social life is not fake in the simple sense, but it is performative. People are constantly managing impressions, roles, signals, and settings. They are not only acting, they are being interpreted. And if you ignore interpretation, you surrender one of the most decisive layers of power. A common mistake capable people make is assuming that self-presentation is inherently dishonest. It is not. Dishonesty is one thing, translation is another. If you have real ability but refuse to frame it, signal it, or make it legible, you are not being pure. You are being naive. The social world cannot reward what it cannot easily see. This does not mean you need to become theatrical. It means you need to understand that clarity is strategic. When you speak, can people identify your point quickly? When you contribute, do they understand the consequence of what you contributed? When you solve something, is the solution attached to your name or absorbed anonymously into the environment? When you enter a room, do people know what kind of weight you carry? These questions sound superficial only to people who underestimate how groups work. In reality, they are about whether your competence can survive contact with human psychology. Because in most status environments, being right is only part of the battle. Being recognized as right is the other half. The third point is even more uncomfortable. People do not award status only based on value. They also award it based on emotional impact. This matters more than many rational people want to admit. A person can be extremely competent and still leave weak emotional traces. They solve the issue, but they do not shape the room. They provide information, but they do not alter the atmosphere. Their presence has utility, but not gravity. Another person enters with calm certainty, speaks in fewer words, creates a sense of direction, and leaves others feeling organized, reassured, or impressed. That second person may not be the most skilled in raw terms, but they are affecting the social nervous system more powerfully, and status often follows the person who regulates collective emotion. In groups, influence is not only about being useful, it is about reducing uncertainty. Who makes people feel that things are under control? Who gives form to ambiguity? Who absorbs pressure without leaking panic? Who can disagree without appearing rattled? Who seems to know what matters and what does not? That person gains status because status is partly a response to perceived stability. This is where philosophical realism becomes important. Much of social hierarchy is built not on abstract justice, but on ancient human instincts. Groups are always scanning for cues of strength, safety, coherence, and orientation. Who should we look at when things become unclear? Who appears difficult to destabilize? Whose reactions set the emotional tone? Competence helps answer these questions, but composure often answers them faster. This is why a nervous genius can lose status to a calm moderate. Not because the calm moderate is superior in substance, but because the group experiences them as more usable under uncertainty. Usable is an important word here. Status is often granted to the person a group can organize around, not necessarily the person with the deepest mind. If that sounds harsh, consider how often this principle operates in everyday life. In meetings, the person who speaks with crisp confidence often gets more traction than the person who is technically more accurate but hesitant. In relationships, the person who appears emotionally self-possessed often has more leverage than the person who feels more deeply but reveals more instability. In conflicts, the person who controls tempo often appears stronger than the person who has better arguments but worse emotional regulation. People do not only judge content, they judge containment. Can you contain yourself? Can you contain tension? Can you contain ambiguity long enough to think clearly? If yes, your status rises, because others unconsciously feel less risk around your presence. This leads to the fourth point. Status is deeply tied to timing. A lot of competent people imagine that if they are correct, eventually it will matter. Sometimes that happens. Often it does not, because social decisions are made in moments, not in ideals. When did you speak? At what stage of the discussion? Before or after the emotional conclusion had already formed, before or after someone else claimed the frame, before or after the room became defensive. Timing determines whether competence lands as insight, interruption, threat, or irrelevance. This is why the same idea can be ignored in one moment and praised in another. Not because its quality changed, but because the social conditions around it changed. Consider the employee who always raises concerns too late. Their concerns may be valid, but if they arrive after leadership has emotionally committed to a direction, they will often be treated as friction rather than intelligence. Or the person in a friend group who gives sharp advice only after someone has decided what they want emotionally. At that point, truth sounds like coldness, or the junior team member who publicly corrects a senior person at the wrong moment. Even if correct, they may damage themselves because the room interprets the act as a status move rather than a contribution. This is one reason raw honesty is not the same as strategic honesty. Mature influence depends on understanding sequence. What does the room need first? Certainty, then nuance, validation, then correction, momentum, then detail, private challenge, then public alignment. Competence that ignores sequence can look socially blind, and once people perceive you as socially blind, your competence starts losing conversion power. This is a hidden law of influence. Truth without timing feels clumsy. Skill without timing feels inert. Correction without timing feels hostile. Ambition without timing feels needy. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. Power is not only about force or virtue, it is also about reading circumstances. Fortune favors those who know when to move, when to delay, when to conceal intention, when to display conviction. In modern language, this means one thing. Social intelligence determines whether competence arrives as impact. If you speak too early, you may be dismissed. If you speak too late, you may be forgotten. If you push too hard, you trigger resistance. If you stay too quiet, you disappear into the background. Status belongs disproportionately to people who understand rhythm. They know when the room is forming its hierarchy. They know when attention is available. They know when a concise statement will travel further than a detailed explanation. They know when silence itself creates weight. Competent people who lack this feel perpetually unseen, and often they are not unseen because others are evil. They are unseen because they are out of sync with how social attention actually works. The fifth point is social proof. This is where many private frustrations become public realities. Most people do not evaluate you independently, not fully. They watch how others evaluate you. If respected people defer to you, your words gain force. If influential people mention your name positively, your mistakes are more forgivable. If a room already assumes you matter, even mediocre contributions are interpreted generously. If a room assumes you are peripheral, even excellent contributions may be ignored or stolen. This is not just politics in the ugly sense. It is a fundamental feature of collective cognition. Humans use other humans to decide what is worth taking seriously. This is why status compounds. Once you are seen as high value, the threshold for being perceived as valuable gets lower. Once you are seen as low value, the threshold gets higher. That is why early impressions matter so much. That is why alliances matter. That is why who introduces your idea can matter more than the idea itself. It is also why some competent people stay trapped. They think each interaction starts from zero. It does not. Most interactions inherit a prior social frame. If your competence exists in isolation, without relationships that legitimize it, then every contribution must fight uphill. If your competence is embedded in a network of trust, respect, and endorsement, then your contribution travels with leverage. You can see this clearly in office life. A highly capable individual contributor may work harder and know more than a well-connected manager, but the manager has cross-functional relationships, visibility with leadership, and the benefit of being socially recognized as someone whose perspective matters. So when both speak, one sounds like a specialist and the other sounds like an authority. This distinction is not always deserved, but it is real, and if you refuse to understand it, you place yourself at the mercy of it. Social proof is not merely about popularity, it is about borrowed credibility. Who vouches for you without needing to say it directly? Who cites you? Who seeks your opinion in front of others? Who gives your presence public legitimacy? If the answer is no one, competence has to do all the lifting alone, and that is a heavy burden in a social world. This is why strategic people cultivate not just skill, but positioning. They build relationships before they desperately need them. They contribute visibly to people whose acknowledgement carries weight. They do not treat networking as fake charm. They treat it as the architecture through which value circulates. The naive mind says, if I am good, people should notice. The realistic mind says, if I am good, I also need pathways through which people can trust, interpret, and repeat that fact. Without those pathways, you may remain privately respected and publicly marginal. The sixth point is controlled self-presentation. This is where many people become allergic, because they hear the phrase and imagine vanity, inauthenticity, or manipulation. But every social environment already runs on self-presentation. The only difference is whether you do it consciously or accidentally. If you consistently undersell yourself, that is self-presentation. If you ramble when making a point, that is self-presentation. If you reveal anxiety in moments where confidence would help others trust your judgment, that is self-presentation. If you dress in a way that contradicts the role you want to occupy, that is self-presentation. If you make your value hard to summarize, that is self-presentation too. You are always signaling. The question is whether your signals support your actual ability or obscure it. Controlled self-presentation means reducing unnecessary contradiction between who you are and how you are perceived. It means speaking in ways that make your thinking easier to carry. It means being selective, not compulsive. It means not bleeding every insecurity into public space. It means understanding that mystery can sometimes command more respect than over-explanation. It means recognizing that status often falls on people who seem to belong where they stand. Belonging is a powerful signal. Many capable people sabotage themselves because they project apology. They speak as if asking permission to exist. They dilute good points with excess qualifiers. They reveal competence only after someone else validates them. They rush. They over-defend. They answer with too much detail when a cleaner answer would create more authority. Why does this matter? Because other people are not only listening to your argument, they are inferring your self-concept from the way you deliver it. If you act like your presence is marginal, they will often agree. If you act like your contribution needs protection, they will smell fragility. If you constantly try to prove your intelligence, they may sense hunger rather than strength. Paradoxically, status often grows when you stop performing for approval and start presenting from internal certainty. Not arrogance, certainty. Arrogance is loud insecurity. Certainty is measured. Arrogance tries to dominate every scene. Certainty knows it does not need to. This distinction is critical. The goal is not to become flashy. The goal is to become coherent. When your behavior, tone, boundaries, and timing communicate the same message as your actual competence, status becomes more likely. Not guaranteed, but more likely. And when they contradict each other, competence leaks. The seventh point is perhaps the deepest. Status is partly a philosophical problem because it forces you to confront how human beings really work, not how you wish they worked. Many people suffer in status games because they are attached to a moral fantasy. They believe value should be enough. They believe being good should naturally be recognized. They believe effort should protect them from being outmaneuvered by image, politics, or charisma. This belief can feel noble. It can also make you defenseless. Nietzsche, in his own hard way, understood that people cling to moral narratives when they cannot tolerate reality. They prefer ideals that preserve self-respect over truths that demand adaptation. And one of the most comforting ideals is that social life is, at bottom, a fair sorting machine. It is not. It is a contested field of perception, appetite, fear, vanity, insecurity, alliance, projection, and symbolic power. Your competence enters that field, but it does not float above it. If you cannot accept this, you will keep misreading outcomes. You will call everything corruption. You will become bitter every time a less capable person advances. You will interpret status literacy as manipulation and leave the game to people with fewer scruples. That is how many intelligent people exile themselves from influence. They confuse realism with cynicism, and because they fear cynicism, they reject realism too. But realism does not require cruelty. It requires accurate vision. You can understand how status works without becoming dishonest. You can learn self-presentation without becoming fake. You can build alliances without becoming a parasite. You can protect your interests without exploiting people. You can become more influential without losing your conscience. In fact, if you refuse to develop these capacities, you often do not preserve morality. You merely surrender leverage. And in many environments, lack of leverage means your values never shape outcomes. This matters for ambitious people especially. Ambition without social understanding becomes frustration. Skill without strategic framing becomes hidden labor. Insight without authority becomes commentary from the sidelines. The world is full of competent spectators. People who can diagnose everything and influence almost nothing. Not because they lack intelligence, but because they never learned that power has a language, and competence alone is not fluent in it. So what should you actually do with all of this? First, stop assuming that invisibility means you lack value. Sometimes it does. Often, it means your value is not being translated. Second, separate resentment from analysis. If someone less competent has more status, ask why in precise terms. Do they manage perception better? Do they control emotion better? Do they have stronger alliances? Do they speak earlier? Do they simplify better? Do they look more like what authority is supposed to look like in that environment? These questions are more useful than outrage. Third, make your competence legible. Do not wait for others to discover your value through osmosis. Speak with structure. Attach your name to your contributions. Summarize impact clearly. Let people understand not just what you did, but why it mattered. Fourth, strengthen composure. In moments of uncertainty, your emotional regulation is part of your perceived intelligence. People trust calm pattern recognition more than frantic accuracy. Fifth, respect timing. The right insight at the wrong moment often loses. Study sequence. Watch when decisions are emotionally made. Learn when to challenge publicly and when to challenge privately. Sixth, build social proof ethically. Create real relationships. Be useful in ways people can remember and repeat. Do not isolate your talent from the networks through which reputation moves. Seventh, refine self-presentation. Reduce behaviors that make you seem less grounded than you are. Do not perform dominance. Project coherence. Speak as someone who expects their words to be weighed. And finally, accept the burden of realism. If competence alone does not win status, that is not an invitation to become manipulative. It is an invitation to become complete. A complete person does not only develop substance, they develop transmission. They understand that skill is raw material, perception is the medium, and influence is what happens when the two align. This is why some people remain trapped in supporting roles despite being exceptional. They built depth without interface. They became valuable without becoming readable. They earned private dependence without public stature. And this is why other people, not always better, sometimes rise faster. They understand a hard truth. In human groups, the visible shape of value often matters almost as much as value itself. That truth can make you cynical if you are shallow, or strategic if you are honest. The point is not to worship status. Status is unstable, often irrational, and easily corrupted. The point is to stop being ruled by myths about it. Because once you see clearly, your choices become cleaner. You stop waiting to be discovered. You stop overinvesting in silent excellence. You stop assuming good work will defend itself. You stop confusing obscurity with humility. You stop mistaking social literacy for integrity. Instead, you begin to think in two layers. How do I become genuinely competent? And how do I ensure that competence can survive contact with perception, group psychology, and power? That is the mature question, not how to fake influence. Not how to dominate people, not how to win attention with empty theater, but how to make real value socially durable, how to ensure your judgment is heard before louder people distort the frame, how to ensure your effort is not endlessly harvested by others with better positioning, how to ensure your intelligence has consequences in the world beyond your private self-respect. Because in the end, competence without status is often trapped power, potential energy that never fully converts, and status without competence is unstable theater. Sooner or later, reality tests it. The strongest position is neither illusion nor purity. It is alignment, real skill, clear signals, good timing, emotional control, credible alliances, deliberate presence. That is how competence starts becoming influence. And that is why competence alone does not win status. It is necessary. But in social life, necessary is not the same as sufficient. If this sharpened the way you read power, subscribe for more essays on influence, status, and social strategy. And if you have ever watched a less capable person lead the room, you now know what you were really seeing.